I'm so glad to be with you all today. My name is Lauren Kirkendall. I'm a faculty member here in the Industrial Organizational Psychology area. I've been here since 2015. So I'm curious, who has ever really heard of IO psychology? All right, that's why I'm here today, to change that. Who's considering a career in IO psychology? Nobody. Okay, maybe by the end of today. What's that? Oh, business majors. Anyone? Okay, cool. So this will be particularly relevant for you. So today I want to explain what IO psychology is, what IO psychologists do, and if you're curious and interested in learning more, how you can learn more about it as a field of IO psychology that is actually pretty lucrative, lots of jobs in the DC area, and a really good way to make an impact on people's daily lives. So before we start getting into what IO psychology is, I just want you to imagine a scenario with me, okay? You win the lottery. All right, imagine that. Can you imagine it? It says, you wish, me too. It says $2 million, but let's imagine more. Let's imagine even more. Let's imagine $20 million. It's enough money that you never have to work a day in your life, okay? You're good. You're good to go. You can pay off your student loans. You could buy a house. You could buy your parents a house. You could buy your siblings a house. You're good to go. So what I want you to think about is this question. If you won the lottery and knew you never needed to work for money, you're good financially for the rest of your life, would you still work? Don't say it out loud. Don't say an answer out loud. Would you pursue some type of professional career even if you knew that you were financially set for the rest of your life? So I'm going to give you just a second to think about that. Who says yes? Look around the room. Who says no? Be bold. Who says no? Be bold. Okay. All right. So what won, Allison? The yeses was like probably 75, 80, 85%, right? Every time I do this is probably actually the most no's I've ever gotten. And hey, don't be ashamed if you're a no. I totally empathize with that. But for everyone who said yes, why? Why would you work if you don't have to? Yeah.
One, I would get really bored if I was just sitting around doing nothing all day, even though I could afford to do that. And two, if I had enough money that I could be set for the rest of my life, I could work a job that I actually wanted to work instead of one that I worked because it would lead me to be financially stable.
And knowing that if you don't like it, you can just quit, right? Yeah, so it's kind of nice. Who else? So yeah, being able to do whatever you want, just that something you're passionate about, no matter how much it pays. Yeah. And to avoid being bored, to have some structure and something interesting to do with your time. Yeah, what else?
I think if I have enough money, I can work in a field that I'm interested in.
Yeah.
Not for earn the money, just for my fun.
Absolutely. So sometimes our career decisions are rooted in, like, sometimes we don't do exactly what we want to do. We do the thing that will meet other goals, like financial goals and family-related goals, right? So, but you would still be interested in working because there's something you're passionate about, even if you didn't have to do it for the money. Good. What else? Here's one right here.
I would want the structure and be able to pursue a passion, but I like the idea of being able to take more risk in what I want to do and
okay, cool.
do something bolder because I know that I won't crumble under the financial pressure.
Yeah, and that would, and why, let me ask a follow-up question. Why would you want to take a risk? What would be the benefit of that?
For me, I like the growth that comes through like big change and whatnot.
So an opportunity for growth and accomplishment, right? Yeah, and that's something that work kind of uniquely provides an opportunity for, right? What else? Any other reasons? Okay, y'all got a lot of good ones there. So, what can work provide other than money? So y'all pretty much checked all my boxes here, right? Most of them anyway. And what this illustrates is just that work, at its best, can fulfill a lot of our psychological needs, right? Can do a lot of things for us that we really want out of life in a way that other aspects of life can't always do. and in such a way that most of you would choose to work even if you didn't have to. So work can be, and hopefully for many of us will be, a source of deep fulfillment and satisfaction throughout our lives. Presumably that's why many of you are here pursuing education, because you want that to lead to good work experiences, right? But this isn't what always happens, right? This is not often, not always, sometimes not frequently the case. Who has ever had an utterly miserable job? Right? I think we have a solid majority there, myself included. What we're trying to do as psychologists is tilt the balance so that there's less of the misery and more of the fulfillment. And the reason I was drawn to psychology as a career is because not only can work be, if structured well and if led well, a source of fulfillment and not a source of misery, but regardless of what's going on at work, it is where we spend our time, right? Working adults is the biggest piece of the pie. Does anyone relate to that? Even for many of you who are working students is a pretty big piece of the pie, right? We spend our time there. And so if you're interested in psychology, if you're interested in helping people, one of the really awesome ways you can help people is to help improve their work experiences. And that's what we do as psychologists. I heard a story once that it was actually from a researcher at the National Institute for Occupational Health and Safety. And she stood up at a conference and she says, it's hard to overemphasize the impact that work experiences have on people's lives, to the extent that I genuinely believe, and I'm curious if y'all agree with this, she said she genuinely believed that people's bosses, because work takes up so much of our time and mental energy, people's bosses could have a bigger impact on their overall quality of life than their spouses or romantic partners. Is anyone prepared to believe that? So, if we want to improve people's lives, make their work experiences better. That is what psychology is all about. It's basically psychology in the workplace. So we use science, we use evidence-based science to try to make work experiences more effective, more satisfying, and more just and equitable. That's what psychology is all about. And we know from decades of studying these topics, we know some important things that can help us do that. So we know that work is effective and satisfying when people are in jobs that are a good fit for their values, their skills, their personality, their interests, right? I'll give you an example from my personal life, and I'm curious, has anyone been in a job that was just a horrible fit for your personality? Myself, one time I was in a position, and something that is maybe odd about me is that I don't love children. You know, I just don't love children. I don't know why. But I was in a position where the only job I was going to be able to get was at Build-A-Bear. Do y'all know what Build-A-Bear is? Build-A-Bear is like, you walk into this shop and you get this like empty teddy bear with nothing in it, and you like stuff it and you decorate it. Basically the job is just smiling at children all day. And so I thought anything I can do to not have to do this would be fantastic. That was kind of cute and funny because it was just a summer job. But many people spend much of their adult lives in jobs that are not a good fit for their personality, for their values, for their interests, for their skills. So one of the things we do as psychologists is try to work with people to help them find career paths that are going to be a good fit, and work with organizations to help them hire people who are going to be a good fit for the jobs they have available. And there's a lot of science that informs that and helps us to do that well. Work is also satisfying when we have supportive bosses. Already talked about that, right? And when we're pursuing clear and meaningful goals. Has anyone been in a job where you feel like what you're doing is actually useless? Okay, quick hand raise right there. Of course, we need to find ways to help people feel that what they're doing is useful, right? In general, and also, you know, positive value to society, morally useful, right? Sometimes people feel like they're creating value, but it's actually harm. Like the economic value they're creating is harmful to people. So we want to avoid that. We want positive value that's created by the work that people do. Many other things we know, but that's a few of them. Something else we know is a lot about justice and equity and diversity in workplaces. We know that people feel a sense of justice when they're fairly compensated for their contributions, when they aren't exposed to excessive stressors or hazards that are avoidable in the workplace, when they aren't discriminated against, and this is a key point, intentionally or unintentionally, because of their race, their religion, their gender, their sexual orientation, any category like that. We don't want that to be a source of discrimination for people. And IO psychologists, one of the main types of work IO psychologists do is help companies understand how they're unintentionally discriminating against people, right? And how they can fix the systems that they have in place so that they're not doing that. That is the legal side of IO, but it's also the side of IO that is trying to create equitable climates within organizations, right? So what are the kinds of jobs people actually do? What are the job titles you could search for if you wanted to learn more about this? Personnel psychologist is a key kind of job title. Talent acquisition, talent assessment, director of selection and assessment. All big companies have these job functions. A lot of companies use consultants for these job functions. So you could work inside a company doing this. You could work as a consultant going around a lot of different companies doing this. You could work for the federal government doing this, or state government or local government. So what we do in these jobs is we help pick the right people for a job. So say you're trying to hire a bunch of programmers. You want them to have programming skills, but you also want them to have values that align with your organization. So certain ethical values. You may want to screen them for integrity, and that's something that we have valid ways of assessing and screening in an applicant pool. So we want to hire for fit with skills, fit with personality, and we want to know what the perfect combination of all those things is, such that we can take an applicant pool of 1,000 or more people and pick the 20 people who are most likely to succeed in that role. So to accurately predict who's going to perform well, and to make sure we're doing that in a way that is fair, that isn't discriminating on the basis of race, gender, or any other kind of social category. Okay. Another thing we do, we use evidence-based and data-informed approaches to improve employees' work experiences. I'll give you an example. A lot of hospitals, healthcare organizations have dealt with massive turnover, meaning that employees are quitting all the time. They can't keep people in these positions. They're understaffed, and it kind of causes a domino effect. So they're wanting to know, why can't we keep people in these jobs? There's a couple ways you can answer that question. You could answer it intuitively, or you can use a data-driven approach. So what we specialize in as IO psychologists is this data-driven approach, where we can go in, we can talk to employees, we can design a survey to really capture the things that are driving people to quit their jobs. We can quantify what particular things it is that are most influential in driving that quitting, and we can recommend to the organization things that they can do to reduce that in a way that would improve employee experiences, while at the same time having a positive impact on the company's financial performance. So in this case, often what it is, well, in the case of COVID, often what it was is people didn't feel safe at work. They didn't feel like they had enough protective equipment. Outside of COVID, it may be that they don't have scheduling control. So their schedule it doesn't take into consideration their family responsibilities, and so they don't have care for their kids, so they have to quit just because they don't have a way of providing care for their kids. Or it could be a toxic work environment. It could be that their coworkers are being rude to them and saying just really rude, uncivil things as they're trying to go about their work. It could be one of 100 things. It could be many, many things. We can pinpoint using surveys and analysis of those surveys and sophisticated data analytic techniques. We can pinpoint what the problem is and then offer a evidence-based solution. So that's a big area. Every company has people who do this, lots of jobs in this. And within the category of improving experience, one way that has become, as you all know, increasingly important in terms of improving employee experience is to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is an area of growth in IO jobs. If you're interested in diversity, equity, and inclusion, we all know that one of the main places that inequities occur is in the workplace, right? And so there are many people who are hired as IO psychologists to come into companies and to assess, are our policies just and equitable? Do we have discrimination in our hiring, in our promotion, in who gets opportunities, in who kind of rises to the top of the organizational hierarchy? We have particular methods we can use to assess all of that. We can also help companies that are trying to increase their diversity. So say you have a financial company and they recognize that they don't have as much diversity as they want, but for some reason they can't seem to fix it. We can come in and we can assess, well, how are you interviewing people? How are you recruiting people? What are people's experiences like from underrepresented groups when they do arrive? And we can give people targeted solutions for achieving their diversity goals and for making sure that all companies in all industries can move closer toward being just, diverse, and equitable and deriving the benefits of that. That's a key area in IO psychology. So let me stop and see, A, do you have any questions about what I just said? And B, what else comes to mind? What are other topics that you think, oh, maybe this is something IO psychologists study? Either of those two questions. Yep. Yeah, so the question is, are there varying levels of education? Yes, and I have a slide for that. So the nice thing about IO psychology, and I have a slide coming soon about is IO psychology for you, is that there are jobs at pretty much any educational level post, as long as you have a college degree and all the way to a PhD. So, often with just a bachelor's degree in psychology, you can get a job in HR. That's often what people will do who want to go on an IO career path. HR, human resources, and IO psychology are not the same thing, but they are working towards similar goals. Sometimes IO psychologists work in HR, sometimes they're housed separately from HR, but HR is a good area to get in to get you on a path toward IO. And so you can get entry-level jobs in that. You can get really good jobs with master's degrees in IO psychology. We have one of the top master's degrees here at Mason. You can also get a PhD. So a lot of people, they love psychology and their parents are like, you can't do anything with an undergrad degree in psychology. Yeah, you can. You totally can with IO. Now, you might get that HR job and realize, I actually want to be in a more influential role. Because a lot of people go into HR and they think, oh man, systems are broken. And I want to be the person who can fix the system. Often then you can go on, get a master's degree, get a PhD, and that will set you up for maybe being in a more influential role. But yeah, it is a very nice career path in the sense that you can do it with an undergrad degree, you can do it with a master's, you can do it with a PhD. And because IO is very much in high demand, I mean, think about the problems we have in our world today. Many of the tools that we have as IO psychologists can help with the solutions for those problems. So it is very much in high demand, and the DC area is actually the hub of IO psychology. There's more IO jobs here than anywhere in the country. So it's very marketable. So yeah, any degree you have, there are certainly job opportunities. And the Career Center at Mason has a kind of a human resources specialist, and you can go there and they can tell you search terms to kind of get started on a career in this direction just with the undergrad degree. You can see how you like it and then decide whether to go to grad school or not. Other questions or comments? Yep.
Where do you usually find IO jobs? Are you guys traditionally always in HR departments, or are there consulting firms? If not for someone who wants to pursue the career, but someone who would want to meet with an IO specialist about their own career.
Yeah. There's. So are you asking? Is there kind of career counseling within IO?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
That's a
And
good
like,
question.
just, I've never heard of this profession before, so where are they? I guess
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah.
I know there's broad categories of different types, but like,
Yeah,
where
totally.
traditionally are IO jobs found?
That's a great question. So, few different categories. Of course, there are IO psychologists in academia, like me, you know, being professors, doing kind of the research that is going to advance knowledge. You have a lot of IO psychologists in just working in big companies. Any Fortune 500 company, even mid-sized company, almost certainly has, if not a team of IO psychologists, at least a few IO psychologists who are working maybe within HR or maybe just closely with HR to optimize their hiring processes. One thing we didn't get to talk about as much is there's a lot of laws about not discriminating in hiring. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. Have y'all heard of that? Does anyone know what Title VII of the Civil Rights Act is? 1964. Basically says companies cannot discriminate on the basis of several protected categories: race, gender, religion, and those categories have expanded in recent years. So a lot of what IO psychologists do is the legal work, and the courts historically have defined discrimination as both intentional or unintentional. So companies have to do these statistical analyses to document whether and to what extent they are unintentionally discriminating against people. And then if they are, IO psychologists will come in and help them fix their system, sometimes voluntarily, sometimes under court orders. And so there's a lot of kind of niche consulting firms that are IO specific. So there's one called, and these would just be consulting firms. So you may work in a company as a personnel psychologist, as a training and development person, as an employee experience person. Or you may work for a consulting company. It may be a really broad consulting company that does any kind of IO consulting, or it may be very specific. So a very specific example would be a company here in the area called DCI Consulting. And they exclusively focus on legal risk. So coming in and helping a company understand, are they at legal risk because of the way that they do their selection or any other kind of major HR decision, and if so, what they can recommend to help you assess that, fix that. There are people who are as specialized as we have an alum from our program. She goes to fire departments and police departments and fixes their promotion systems, and that's her whole job. Because there's a lot of often intentional and unintentional discrimination. You think about a firefighter, there can be mean racial differences in height, you know? And, you know, if you're hiring a firefighter, do anyone know anything about the firefighter test? You have to do all this physical stuff. Like you have to pull a hose and you have to climb a ladder and, you know, something like that. If it's not calibrated well, it could discriminate against someone because they're shorter, even though like you don't necessarily need to be tall to do the job. That's an example of unintentional discrimination. And that could actually cause racial discrimination if you have, you know, kind of average differences in height across racial groups. And so an IO psychologist will come in and say, oh, you have racial discrimination. It's because you have this thing in your test. And companies will be like, how is that thing possibly racist? and the answer is it's not intentionally so. It's just because there are these height differences in your applicant pool, it accidentally has this racial impact. So why don't you replace that thing with this other thing that tests the same thing but doesn't tap into height as much, and it can get rid of your so that's the kind of thing. So it can be very niche, like fixing firefighter tests. Or it can be very professional, white-collar settings, healthcare settings. So every federal government agency has IO psychologists. NASA, you know, best place to work in the federal government according to science. They have an organizational consulting branch where basically they have, my student was an intern there, they just have consultants there. NASA scientists come in and they say, we're having this problem on my team, how can we fix it? IO psychologists give a solution, they implement it, right? So that it's pretty much every sector has jobs in IO, but very few of you had heard about it because it kind of flies under the radar, you know. People think if you want to work in business, you have to go to the business school. Business school is fine. But IO psychology is the psychology underneath all of this. So if you like business settings and you like psychology, it's definitely worth considering. I don't know, did I answer your question? Yeah. Okay. What other questions? Anything popping up on the? Yeah, okay.
There's a few that were like general questions, but one you sort of touched a little bit, saying why don't we hear about IO? Like we hear about work strikes and we hear about stuff like that, but we don't hear about IO at all.
We are constantly trying to figure that out as IO psychologists because we feel like we're over here like, you know, have a lot to offer and nobody wants it. So I don't know. I think a simple answer is it's often not in the textbooks. So do you use a textbook, Allison?
I sort of, and I do have an IO chapter that they will have read by now.
Yeah, but, that's been a more recent thing because we've really lobbied for it. But, you know, in the years past, it wasn't in the textbook. You take an intro psychology class, it's not in there. So that's basically why I'm here, is because we're trying to let people know this is a good career path that you may be interested in. But yeah, we do not know why people do not know about it.
Yeah, I figured you would say that.
Yeah.
PsyOp has the professional
that
organization does have a lot for intro psych teachers that I have used. But another one, do you do any research, or I guess do IO, on how rejection for a job affects a candidate's professional life after? Is that an IO area, or is that more like?
Yeah, how rejection from you applied to a job and you didn't get it, how that affects people.
Sure, and how does that,
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's a lot of the research on that really focuses on how it impacts your sense of self-efficacy. And a lot of it is, are you attributing it to something internal, or are you attributing it to the process isn't fair that they use? Really, really important for companies to feel, to make sure that their process is fair and that people going through the process feel that it's fair too. And that informs the way we design assessments, is to try to help people feel like it's fair. So yes, it could be devastating to get rejected from a job, especially if you think it was unfair. I mean, has anyone been to, I'd love to hear like the wildest interview questions anyone has ever gotten. Has anyone just had bizarre interview questions where you're like, this is not real? This is not, you know, like, now don't tell us anything too crazy, but you know, anybody had a crazy interview question? Yeah, okay.
I don't know if it was crazy, but it was supposed to be my first interview, so I was not really prepared for that question. My interviewer asked me what are the reasons that I would quit the company, and I was like, I haven't even joined. Why would you ask me about quitting the company so soon?
They probably have a turnover problem, and they're just advertising that to you there in the interview. So, yeah, that's funny.
I'll share one I had.
Yeah, go ahead. Or we could talk about Michael Scott on The Office, either way.
That's a good one. That's a good one, too. No, I had one. It was for a teaching interview for a professor job.
Yeah.
And the person, well, we know there was a little bit of toxic stuff going on. It wasn't here.
Yeah.
But the person intentionally kept asking questions with vocabulary that I didn't know.
Oh, wow. Like GRE words and
I have a pretty good vocabulary, but they kept using words I didn't know. But one of them was actually related to teaching, and it was like he did it on purpose. He said something about andragogy, which is the pedagogy of teaching adults. We use the word pedagogy to talk about things related to teaching, like kind of, theories of teaching and ways of teaching. And we all use the word pedagogy. He used the word andragogy in his interview question.
Just being unnecessarily intimidating,
Clearly, I didn't take that job.
This one wasn't actually me. It was my mom, because she came home and told me about this ridiculous interview that she had gone through. The guy who was interviewing her asked her if during the week, not like the weekends, but during the week, if she would prioritize work over her kids.
Oh, yeah, okay. This is a good, really bad example. A bad, good example, good, bad example. This is good. Okay. So, this is illegal, okay? One thing about IO psychology is knowing your rights as a worker, right? Knowing your rights as a worker. If you're in the workplace and a customer is treating you poorly because of your race or religion or gender or whatever, the company is responsible for protecting you from that. There's lots of rights you have that you may not be aware of, but in this case, this is classic. Another variant of this example is you're in an interview. Oh, or I see your ring. Are you planning? Do you have kids? Are you planning to have kids soon? Is that legal? It is not legal because you're treating, and the men are not asked that. The men are not asked if they're planning to have kids soon. That's called adverse treatment. It's when your selection process has different questions for people for one social category than from another. And that is used to rule people out on the basis of something other than what the job requires. So the assumption there is, oh, you're a mother or you may become a mother. You're not going to be devoted to work. That's not something that is appropriate in the selection process by legal precedent. So she could have reported them for that. But that's a different topic. What was our original question? I forgot. Oh, if you're rejected, yeah. So if you're rejected and it's unfair, big problem for, it's going to cause you to be angry, and some people retaliate against the organization. But if you're rejected and it feels fair, people are going to respond to that differently. Some people are going to be on a negative trajectory because they think that whatever thing they didn't have is fixed. Some people can take that as an opportunity to learn and grow and develop the skill, but it is a very emotional, impactful thing to be rejected for sure. Yeah.
So you're talking about when people don't get the job, like the obligation of the company to, you interview a bunch of people and you can only take one. To also treat those people correctly. Yes. I'm thinking about like graduate school applicate, like some sort of things like that can be like really toxic. Yes. Or very stressful for people, and they can feel very dejected afterwards, and sort of having a system that doesn't necessarily leave people wounded. Yeah, right. And we call that informational justice, or that's and
it's basically what we call the broader category interactional justice. So if one of the chapters, if you take my class in IO psychology, one of the chapters is on justice and fairness. How do people form fairness perceptions, and what are the boxes you need to check if you're in charge of any kind of decision that impacts someone that helps them feel as okay and with the process as they can, even if there's a negative outcome. So there's several different types of justice, and you need to check all the boxes to make that happen. One type is just treating people with kindness when you deliver the message, right? Treating people with respect and kindness. The messaging about why they were rejected is really important to get right. But also, another concept is informational justice. So people being able to ask why, and you giving them a real legitimate answer. And that's not something we necessarily have the process optimized for in graduate admissions, but sometimes people reach out to me and they ask, how could I strengthen my application? And I try to give them feedback that's honest, because I think, people put a lot of energy into it. They would love to know why. And that part is especially important for promotions. If people are in an organization, they're denied promotions, or they didn't get the pay raise that they thought they would, being able to explain why. And our department chair, I think, is good about this, in that whenever we get merit-based raises, here comes this email. Informational justice, it's that long, right? And it's like, here's how I decided, let me know what you think. We had input into the process. So, you know, people don't react well to, this is just the way it is, deal with it. And some people actually, if you look at instances of workplace violence, they come into, my phone knows that I'm interested in this, so I don't know if y'all see these stories, but I see them like on the regular. Often it's like someone was denied a promotion and they were really angry about it and they retaliated with violence, and that's, so it's nothing to be taken lightly. Like, we have to treat people fairly, and yeah, so. Yeah, sure. What time did you say we?
We're done at 11:45.
Okay.
So we have, there's the, up
there's
there,
a clock,
if you
okay.
like an analog clock like I do.
Yeah.
Somebody asked, how would IO help with jobs that are just miserable?
Oh, this is
like
great.
Fast food and
yeah,
things
yeah,
like
yeah.
that, low wages,
Yeah.
et cetera.
We could talk about that for about 10 hours. So, an interesting question to think about is, you know, are there any jobs that just are irredeemably miserable? Nothing can be done. Shout some out. Yeah.
Line cooks at fast food places.
Okay, let's work with that. So, okay.
So say it again.
Line cooks at fast food restaurants. So you're sitting there at Waffle House. Let's go to Waffle House. Is that cool? You're sitting there, you just do the same thing over and over. I don't know if y'all have ever heard the name Matthew Crawford. He's not an IO psychologist, but he's written books about work that are really interesting, and he actually thinks line cook is kind of a fulfilling job. But I hear you, and let's go with that example. So IO psychologists back in the day, what they wanted to do is they wanted to go into companies and say, show me your most miserable job and I will make it more humane and more interesting and more meaningful. And the way we would do that is through what's called the job characteristics model. So there's these 5 or 6 categories. One of them being, are you seeing a process from start to finish? So if we talk about the line cook, there's a difference between the person who is just doing fries, and that's all they do all day long, and people who are maybe putting the entire meal together, or people who are not just doing fries but are rotating into different positions. The person just doing the fries is maybe more miserable than people getting rotated around to other things. Do you buy that a little bit maybe? So increasing task variety, increasing what we call task identity, which is being able to see something from beginning to end. So if you're working on a factory floor, you don't just do the one little thing, but you get to see the product more from start to finish, which a lot of business people don't like that because they want to just have everybody specialize, and that seems efficient. But psychologically, having that variety, having the ability to see something from start to finish, having contact with beneficiaries, so knowing that you're making a difference in people's lives. Early IO psychologists would say, we can take any job, we can take the line cook, and we can run it through this assessment of task identity, task significance, these different features that make work meaningful, and we can, what we call, enrich the job. We can restructure the job so that it is less miserable. And the idea is you could do that with more or less any job. Were companies interested in that? Not really. So, you know, in some workplaces, there are just a lot of jobs like this, and the IO standpoint on it is that, you know, those companies have just not decided to structure those jobs in ways that could maybe be a little bit more fulfilling. You know, we could debate this a lot, right? But that's one way people think about it. I don't know if you have any reactions, or do you have your hand up? Okay. Could the line cook job be a little better, you think?
Probably. I mean, I've
Yeah.
worked it for 4 years of my life, and
Yeah.
I'm at a point where if I ever worked it again, I'm just tempted to start throwing burgers at customers.
Yeah.
Get a different job.
Well, you know, you're going to get your degree, and you can you can totally get a different job, because that, I mean, it is, yeah, I agree with you that there are, part of it is because the job itself is maybe feels less meaningful than other jobs. Part of it is that companies won't do the things that would make the job more satisfying. So I think it's a little bit of both. A little bit is the job itself, a little bit of it is the way the company has chosen to design the job, maybe. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to like, because I know like for example, like I work in like the video industry and a lot of times, and I know like kind of like our environment, we usually have that kind of like the stigma, or like it's like mostly a male dominated like.
Where did you say you work?
Oh, I work in the video game industry.
Video game industry. Okay.
And
yeah,
I know
yeah.
as you know, there's like that fear
Yeah.
about like there's like all the male dominance or like kind of industries and like that, and how like it feels like for employees, especially if you're like either minorities or if you're like female employees, like it feels like that kind of like divide where like
Yeah.
you're not really part of, like how do you usually like confront that, especially for like new hires where it's like that fear where it's like you're going, especially with recent stories as you know with like sexism and like discrimination
Yeah.
that's been happening in the industry specifically a lot. To give
Yeah.
an example.
So, so kind of how do companies deal with that? Yeah, that's a very common issue. So a lot of people, they want to talk about increasing diversity in organization, and that's fantastic, right? Because more diversity, more innovation, especially something like the video game industry. So you want to get more perspectives in there, but the problem is a lot of places will stop there. They'll stop at, we've hired people from underrepresented racial groups, we've hired women, and yay, we did it, we did diversity. But that is a disaster, because if people come into that and then the benefits of diversity are not inevitable, right? So you can have a diverse workplace. If you've shifted into having a more diverse workplace, so a male-dominated field where you're going to get more women, you're going to get more people of color, that initial transition process can be very tense. So what we try to help people do is not just increase representation of people from different groups, but help that transition go smoothly so that people from underrepresented groups are having positive experiences. So we have a lot of different ways to do that. One of the things that we do is we just train people. I mean, y'all have probably heard of diversity training. We try to help people have conversations about, hey, how can we treat each other well? How can we respect and understand differences? And we also we use a data-driven approach. So when I was talking about that data-driven approach, we will conduct surveys. Do you feel like you belong here? Do you feel like you're being treated with respect? Do you feel like your input is valuable? Do you like coming to work? And we'll look at that. We'll break it down by group, and we'll say, hey, how are the women feeling? How are the people of color feeling? We can even look in a particular unit. So how do the people you supervise, how do the men feel compared to the women? So we can really diagnose, like, what's the problem? Are there certain units that are having a problem? And what kind of interventions and solutions can we bring forward to kind of make things better? I don't know if that's speaking at all. Is that speaking to what you have experienced? Yeah, and so you have to move past what we call representation goals into, yeah, just the experience, optimizing the experience for people from underrepresented groups.
No, it's just like very interesting. Yeah, because like I'm actually a minority myself. I'm actually from like I grew up, but I've always like noticed that like even like when I like tell people usually like when I was going into the industry, like I still had that kind of fear of myself, even though I was very white, but I always had that fear that like if I represent myself or like in the industry, I feel like I would be more honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And many people have that fear, right? And so the hope is that like people in these jobs are, I mean, ideally in a workplace, you could say that out loud. You could say, hey, I'm not sure, maybe I feel uncomfortable because this is a very white space, and a company that is functioning really well is going to have certain practices in place that's going to make you feel comfortable. One thing that's really helpful is what we call affinity groups. Have you heard of that? So, you want, you can look at Google's website and they have tons of these. So you may have, the Islamic community at your workplace, or the African American community, or whatever community, LGBTQ community, and it provides a space for you to talk about your feelings with people who may be having the same experience. But that happens ideally alongside broader initiatives that help people talk across groups and have really good contact and experiences. So those are the sorts of things we try to design. And increasingly, there are consulting companies that come into organizations and help them have a really specific plan for this. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor. Do you believe that the more happy and fulfilled the worker, the more successful the company overall?
There's a chapter on this in my class, so take my class. It depends. If you know, if there's one thing that you should know about psychology, it's 2 words. It depends. Do you agree with me, Allison?
Yes. Yes,
it
we say that a lot here.
depends. So the question was basically, is a happy worker a productive worker? So, and this is a really important question because people like me, I care about well-being. So I'm like, let's just improve people's work experiences. But you talk to people at the business school and they'll be like, what about the bottom line? So you have to be able to talk about it both ways. So is a happy worker a more productive worker? It depends. And so, people say, yeah, sure. I mean, okay, is a happy worker a more productive worker? Yes? Okay, so how do you explain why Amazon is so profitable? Jeff Bezos, he's like the richest person in the world or something, right? Or no, I think, is he still the richest person in the world, Jeff Bezos? He's up there, right? So
Somebody
Amazon, has anyone worked in an Amazon warehouse? There's usually at least 1 or 2 people. Do y'all know? You did? Were you happy there? No. Okay, it was utterly miserable, right? Worse than the line cook, right? Why? Do you mind saying? We're not going to send this to Jeff Bezos. Allison, please don't let him see it.
Long.
Yeah.
Lots of work, no breaks.
Yeah.
It was just, you clock in, you worked, there was nothing you did except work. Even going to the bathroom for a bit was difficult.
Yeah.
And then I just walked out and I didn't go back.
Okay, so Amazon warehouse worker, maybe worst job we have in our economy, right? And many, so much worse than the line cook, right? Okay, so people have had miscarriages. People have passed out because the working conditions are so brutal. Now, happy worker's a productive worker. Why is Amazon so profitable if their workers are so miserable? So it depends, okay? Jeff Bezos says, let me know when I don't have any applicants for my jobs and I will improve working conditions. So it's kind of it's a little naive to just say happy worker's a productive worker, because if that's true, then Amazon is an anomaly, right? So is a happy worker a more productive worker? If you're in a good mood, you are more creative. So if your job is to create ideas, yeah, happy worker, productive worker. But that's not what Amazon warehouse workers do. And so in that case, actually, the way they maximize productivity is kind of creating working conditions that really micromanage people, right? And so it really depends. So a lot of what we do as psychologists is if people don't buy this whole deal about making people happy at work, if they're like, that's pie in the sky, that's a fantasy, we have to convince them that there is some financial benefit to caring about this stuff, to caring about, and that's tricky because, well, I'll bracket that, but it's hard because we hope people would do it just because they value being humane, but a lot of companies, y'all know that companies don't necessarily value being humane, so we have these ways of convincing them trying to use data to convince them that they would be better off if they treated people better. Let me give you an example from my role model. So her name is Susan Lambert. She works at a business school, I think in Chicago. And she's very interested in retail workers who are really struggling with their jobs because they don't have control over their schedules. So has anyone ever worked in a job where they give you your schedule like the day before, the week before? Raise your hand. Has anyone worked in a job where you show up and they may say, we don't need you today? And you need the money, but they're not going to pay you because they didn't. That's called just-in-time scheduling. Have you ever heard that term? Just-in-time scheduling is where we're going to kind of keep the minimum number of people on the floor based on the current traffic. Now, that's great for the company. Why? They can pay as little as possible to have the people on the floor. It's horrible for the worker because they need the money, and some people have commuted from 2 hours away to be told to go home, and they've paid their bus fare or whatever, right? Or they've paid their gas money. It's horrible for the workers. So Susan Lambert went in, and she's an occupational health psychologist, which is basically the IO people who care about health and well-being, or the people who specialize in that. So she went in and she said, let me try. She went to Gap, actually. She went to Gap and she said, please let me try to convince you that if you give people more control over their schedule, both letting them give preferences and also guaranteeing certain minimum hours, because people have to arrange their childcare and everything, right? I will test whether it positively impacts your bottom line. If you actually will be more profitable, and it's an empirical question, right? A happy worker is not always a more productive worker. So we have to show the data, right? So she went in, she did an experiment at Gap. She took randomly assigned some stores to business as usual. The other stores got her intervention, which is people get to express their preferences. People can swap shifts with each other if they want to, and if you're scheduled, you get your schedule 2 weeks in advance, and we're not going to cancel on you if we schedule. So the business people were like, we're going to lose money because we're going to have to pay people more. Guess what? They actually had a positive impact on their bottom line. And why do you think they did? So she was able to document that this thing that workers want that you think is going to cost you money is actually going to make you money. Does anybody have any guesses about why that improved their bottom line? Giving people scheduling control and giving people guaranteed hours. They did have to pay more because they had to let people have their guaranteed hours. But why do you think it made them money? Yeah.
I would guess that there's some level of the workload was spread more evenly if more people were being asked to work, so people were happier, more positive interactions with customers led to them maybe buying more.
Yeah.
In general, people were happier, so people wanted to be in the store more.
Yeah, so a better customer experience, probably much of this was true. The thing that they measured that they ended up confirming is that there was a better customer experience because there was more seniority. Fewer people were quitting. Because, hey, if you tell me my schedule in advance, then I can get my childcare sorted out, and this will work for me, so I'll stay. So they had more seniority, they had more people who had been there for longer, and so when a customer comes in, I mean, have y'all ever been to a store and like nobody who works there knows what's going on? That's what happens when you have that turnover where people are constantly quitting. No one in the store knows what's going on. So because they had more people who were experienced, each shift had, some more people on it who knew what they were talking about, and so customers would come in and have a better experience, more quickly find what they wanted. And so even though, they did have to spend more money to pay people, it ended up having a positive impact because the greater seniority impacted the customer experience. So your question, is a happy worker a productive worker? That is one of the central questions of IO psychology, and the answer is really, it depends. And if we care about employee well-being, we have to go in and kind of convince companies to let us try these little experiments and try to win them with data to show, hey, yeah, it does. Now, sometimes it backfires. So in the case of diversity, we don't want to have to say, we want women here because it helps our bottom line. There's actually social psychology research that says that backfires on women feeling included. So it's tricky. I mean, you do often have to make the bottom line argument, the financial argument, But you also want to try to find ways to persuade people that are more about, you know, moral reasons and humane reasons, because this kind of constant focus on the bottom line sometimes makes people feel, oh, I'm just here for your numbers or something like that. And so it's kind of a tough balance. But in the case of some of these well-being initiatives, it is possible to go and to do an experiment and show, hey, this actually does impact you positively. Now with Amazon, you know, Amazon workers unionized in the past couple of years, which was just shocking to everyone. And so, you know, it'll be interesting to see in coming years if they're open to considering maybe improving their employees' experiences. But many companies just aren't, and so don't work there. Finish your college degree and don't work at these places, right? Yeah. They did, and yeah, I don't know if they still do, but what actually happened with Susan Lambert, and this is why she's my role model, she did this experiment, but she also, she lobbied pretty hard using her scientific evidence that there should be regulations against just-in-time scheduling, that companies shouldn't be allowed to do some of the stuff they do because of how horribly it impacts families. I mean, if you're a single mom, and you get your schedule the night before, what are you going to do with your kids? And she had this article in the New York Times. I can send it if you want to pass it around. And they interviewed this single mother, and she said she had to choose between, like, you know, they want her to come in. She doesn't have childcare. So is she going to leave her kid at home alone? Or is she going to lose her job? That's the kind of situation you put people in when you have just-in-time scheduling. Because there's a lot of single parents out there, right? And so she actually lobbied for legislation prohibiting certain extreme forms of just-in-time scheduling, and it was successful in New York. Now, it's not necessarily widespread, but same thing with Starbucks. Like, Starbucks was doing just-in-time scheduling. She wrote all about that in media outlets, and they actually kind of, because, you know, Starbucks prides themselves on treating employees well. Has anyone worked at Starbucks? Yeah, so they pride themselves in that. So if you kind of go into the media and say, they will make changes. So her science actually led to companies making changes, but one of the reasons it did is because she removed this mental barrier and helped people to see how your workers actually, like, you may actually make more money if you treat people well. It's not always the case, but sometimes it is, right? Often it is, yeah.
As of early 2023, poor Jeff Bezos is only the 3rd richest person.
Okay, so.
Poor guy.
Any questions on the? Y'all have great questions.
There was one here about like if we're not an IO psychologist, how do we find out what our rights are as an employee? Like, I think some eyes are being opened here, like, oh wow, we have more rights than we think we do. Like, how do people find out about that stuff?
That's great. Go to the EEOC website. Can I don't know, let's see here.
I can always give it to them too later.
Can I go? This is dangerous, me trying to do this in a classroom, I don't know. Okay.
They're used to it. I do a lot of.
Okay. Do y'all know what the EEOC is? The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So please do take my 333 class. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. I'll tell you your rights. But the EEOC was established as a federal government agency. The Department of Justice also does some of this too, but the EEOC was established in response to Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which says can't discriminate against people on the basis of race, gender. Now, what I want to flag here is that before 1964, I don't know how much history y'all have studied, before 1964, you could, and people did. They would say, this job is for white people. I mean, actually. Like, before 1964, you could write a job ad and you could say, African Americans are not eligible for this job. And that was legal. And people did that.
Irish need not apply.
What?
Irish need not apply.
Yeah, totally legal. And so what the Civil Rights Act of 1964 did is said, you can't do that. And since then, like the legal precedent has been established for what that means. And a lot of IO psychology is rooted in kind of the technical side of establishing that. So the EEOC was developed, and what they do is they basically regulate, they enforce and assess all of this. So companies of a certain size have to send these metrics into the EEOC about who has applied, so whenever, on an application you have to fill out all this demographic information, you're probably like, why do they need to know this? It's because of these EEOC forms. It's actually good for you that you have to tell them all this stuff about you because the EEOC can monitor it. So if you feel like you have been, and you can poke around on the EEOC website and see a lot about your legal rights, but if you feel like you have been discriminated against because of, here are the categories, you ready? If you believe you've been discriminated against at work because of your race, color, religion, sex, sex includes pregnancy, gender identity, and sexual orientation. National origin, age, 40 or older is potentially age discrimination. Disability or genetic information, you can file a charge of discrimination. So you can report to the EEOC, and they will determine whether you have a plausible claim, and if they do, there's a whole process that follows. So often what happens is class action lawsuits. A class action lawsuit is when a group of people who are in the same, we call these protected groups, the same protected group, you get together and you say, hey, we all had the same experience. We all went to this interview and were asked if we're having kids. We're all women. And we think they have a claim. And there's a whole process. And this is what DCI, the consulting company in DC, they walk with companies through this process. So most companies deal with this preemptively. They hire organizational psychologists to monitor all their stuff and make sure that they're not intentionally or unintentionally discriminating. But if you feel like you have been discriminated against, you can file a claim. Don't be naive about it because the EEOC is not perfect and they're understaffed. So it's not like we don't live in this perfect society where the government sorts out injustices in this kind of linear way. But the mechanism exists for that purpose, and you can actually go, something that's super interesting that we do in my graduate course is if you look at the EEOC newsroom, let me see if I can find it. I get these alerts in my inbox. You can just see what has been going on. So look, nursing facility Symphony to pay $400,000 to settle EEOC pregnancy discrimination suit. So you can see, so EEOC sues Walmart for disability discrimination. EEOC sues TC Wheelers for harassing and driving out transgender employee. So, it's all public information. So this is the federal government agency that regulates anti-discrimination laws. Does that answer your question? Whose question was that? I can't remember. Yeah, okay.
That was one that I had in here.
Oh, okay.
There's several also who just kind of want to know, like, your story, like why are you interested in how did you get into this? How did you, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so how do I get back to this? I don't know.
You just have to go back to like making it, yeah.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So does anyone want to guess what state I'm from? Do y'all hear my accent? Guess. Yes. Georgia? So close, adjacent to Georgia. Yes, no one's ever gotten it that fast. So I actually have a very toned down South Carolina accent. If you heard the rest of my family, you would be like, whoa. So I grew up in South Carolina. I went to a small liberal arts college called Wofford, and they did not have a class in IO psychology. It was not on my radar at all. I thought I wanted to do neuroscience, but then I started doing rat research, and I was like, nope, do not want to do neuroscience. So I just left college not knowing what I wanted to do, which is fine. It's so fine, right? Like, it's kind of a process of elimination. So even if you don't know what you want to do, you probably ruled out some things. Like I ruled out that I didn't want to work with rats for the rest of my life, right? I ruled something out, so that's good. You might not know. So I moved to DC, worked for a nonprofit, and I knew I was very interested in psychology. I actually thought about doing philosophy, which I did end up marrying a philosopher. Y'all may have had him, Davis Kirkendall. Has anyone had? Okay. Tell me any stories you have about him, and if I could give you extra credit, I would.
He mentioned you in his first lecture.
He mentioned me in his lecture. he does crazy stuff in class. Like his rate my professor compared to my rate my professor, I sound just so boring. But but I think I'm fine. But his rate my professor is like, this guy's completely
Because rate my professor is a
It's
really
so
valid, accurate
well, we talk
way
about
of-
rate my professor in my psychology
do
class
we.
if you want to learn more about that. What were we talking about? Oh, yeah, I was going to do philosophy. So I was interested in psychology, and I started working in this nonprofit, and I was just like, this is going to ruin my like. It was the first time as an adult I had ever experienced like, I am losing my mind. Like I am just going to go completely crazy because just some stuff that was, and it wasn't like a hyper toxic work environment. It was just like, things aren't going well here. And so then I realized, oh, there's like a field that studies this. So I was interested in, and I'm going to kind of go to this slide because it connects, but I was really interested in helping people, but I knew I didn't want to be a therapist. And I wanted to just like do something that was super practical, like people's daily lives. And so I discovered this field, and I had just felt the impact of burnout and the impact of being in a work environment that wasn't very informed by best practices. And I said, this is what I want to do. It was mostly because I was interested in well-being, and I realized there's a whole field where you can help people have better well-being at work. So that's kind of how I got into it. I went to Purdue in Indiana and graduated there in 2015. Yeah. So, but what I want to say about if IO may be worth considering, because y'all are hearing about it for maybe the first time. If you care about people, many people are in psychology because they care about people or they like working with people, and you like the idea of improving systems, okay? Many people think about psychology, they think about clinical psychology, they think about one-on-one therapy. We need as many therapists as we possibly can have. It's not a good fit for many people. Many people don't. You need a certain set of personality traits for that to be a good fit for you. So there's many, and if it is a good fit for you, great. But many people discover that it's not for them they want to help people, but they don't want to sit there in a one-on-one therapy. That's maybe it's too emotionally exhausting. Maybe you're not extroverted enough. Maybe it's just too heavy, too dark, and your personality is just not a good fit, right? Some people just like working with systems. The idea that like how companies select employees has this dramatic impact on people's lives, and that there are best practices you could put in place that would help people have better experiences when they interview and prevent people from being in jobs that are going to be miserable from them and getting people in jobs that are going to be good. So if you like that idea of like helping people by fixing systems, you all know there's a lot of broken systems in the work world, so there's plenty of work to be done. So it might be a good fit for you if you like that. If you like business settings, if you're in the business school and you like business, but you don't like the macro stuff like strategy and like corporate strategy and all this, but you like the individual psychological component of people's work experiences. You like the idea of using data or research to help employees and organizations. Here's what I'll say about data. If you love data, you will like IO psychology. If you don't love data, not all jobs require it. So it's how you feel about data, how you feel about stats. If it's your thing, IO psychology is a great place for it. If it's not your thing, that's only some of the jobs, so don't rule it out. You want to make money, but you don't want to be in school forever. We talked about that already. Financial prospects for people with a master's, really good. Or you're looking for a career path in DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Is a way. There are many ways you can have a career path in DEI. You can do it in higher ed. You can do it in many settings. But in IO psychology is a great place to do it to have a positive impact. Yeah, other questions?
Let me see. Anybody else out there have anything?
And then once we do this question, I am going to tell you some just concrete next steps if y'all are interested in hearing those. What's that? 3 minutes, okay.
Okay, so my question is, have there ever been IO psychologists that worked like with teachers like within the education system?
Yeah, totally.
Okay, because I know it's like, do you have any examples about it or any people that you know that have worked with people in the education system?
I don't think I know any people personally, but like an example would be like, there's a teacher burnout problem. So what can schools do? Like the Fairfax schools could, in theory, hire an IO psychologist to come in and figure out what's causing teacher burnout and to provide suggestions for how to fix it. So that's something that IO psychologists totally could do. Not sure how widespread it is, but it's certainly a possibility. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So the last thing I want to say is just next steps. So see if I don't know why my QR code has a dinosaur in it, but anyway, it has a dinosaur in it. If you want some future opportunities, I'm teaching 333 is the IO class. It's really fun. It's like what we just did here today. I'm teaching it asynchronously online in the summer, also online in the fall. Sign up for it. We offer it pretty much every semester, either me or a grad student. We have something called the IO Learning Series. That's the QR code there. Drop in and just hear IO practitioners so you get a sense of or IO research so you can get a sense of what's going on. That's just a weekly colloquium. Grad programs, we have top programs, master's, PhD. We also have a new program, the Masters of Professional Studies in Applied IO Psychology. That's a degree you can get while you're working. It's fully online, and it's 8-week courses for a year and a half. And so it's meant for people who want to go back to school while they're working. So those are kind of some next steps if you're interested. And I'll stick around for a minute if anyone wants to talk to me. Also, check out PsyOp's website. That's our professional organization for IO psychology. Lots of good information there. Yeah, so thanks for letting me chat with y'all today. Hopefully it was interesting to some.